After 77 years, are we witnessing another Nakba in Palestine? The State of Israel was created on this day in 1948, long considered the greatest tragedy in Palestinian history. Will it begin to pale in comparison to Israel's assault on Gaza? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the Nakba. Well, many have already declared what's happening in Gaza another Nakba. At best, it's an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. At worst, it is genocide. Yet still, Palestinians persevere. And they are remembering this day in 1948 as the foundation of their battle for recognition and their fight to live free from military occupation. Here's a look now at the plight of Palestinians since 1948 and the struggle today to stop the annihilation of their people.
The Palestinians' 77 years of suffering continues. May 14, 1948, after the British mandate in Palestine ended, Israel declared independence, triggering war with Arab countries. What followed has been the displacement, killing, and destruction of Palestinian lives. 750,000 Palestinians, around 80% of the population at that time, were expelled from their land. Most of those who remained were pushed into the occupied West Bank and Gaza. The Palestinians call the loss and dispossession the Nakba, or catastrophe. It's become a symbol for their cause. Thousands have rallied in Ramallah to mark the anniversary.
Our priority now to stop the genocide, to stop the aggressive settlers, to stop the aggression against our people in Gaza Strip. We learn the steadfastness. We remain here, and we will stay in this land because we believe that victory day will come one day.
Now, the Palestinians are enduring another Nakba, or worse, a genocide. Israel has blocked all aid from entering Gaza for 10 weeks. The entire strip is edging closer to famine. Badriye Mohareb left her home in Jaffa in 1948 and settled in Gaza. Israel's latest assault razed her home in Khan Yunis to the ground. She's now living in a tent next to rubble.
This war is destruction. It did not leave a home. It did not leave a human or anything. Our houses are gone. We are gone. We leave it up to God. There is a lot of death. There is a lot of destruction. People are destroyed. People are destroyed. And they fled.
Israel, with the help of the US, is trying to replace the UN aid agencies that it's banned from operating. The privately run Gaza Humanitarian Foundation plans to start work in the Strip by the end of May, but human rights groups and the UN have heavily criticized the model.
It restricts aid to only one part of Gaza, while leaving other dire needs unmet. It makes aid conditional on political and military aims. It makes starvation a bargaining chip. It is a cynical sideshow, a deliberate distraction, a fig leaf for further violence and displacement.
On top of that, Israel is pushing for the total displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza. Earlier in May, Prime Minister Netanyahu's war cabinet approved a plan to expand the military campaign and conquer the whole strip.
They will not get in and out. We will call up reserves to take over territory, then leave the territory and then carry out raids from what remains. That's not the plan. That is not our intention. The intention is the opposite.
Since that threat, Israel has ramped up its attacks. On Wednesday alone, at least 80 Palestinians were killed, including 22 children. And it's not only Gaza. Israeli forces have also repeatedly conducted raids in the occupied West Bank, demolished homes, and expanded illegal settlements. On Thursday, Netanyahu's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, wrote on X that the West Bank must be flattened just as Gaza. The Palestinian struggle to return home and live in peace has taken a hit day after day. Without any real will to stop Israel so far, a nation that has suffered so much for decades is now at risk of annihilation.
So after 1948 and 1967, are we witnessing a third Nakba? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Boston, public policy fellow at American University of Beirut, Rami Khouri. From Phoenix, Arizona, Palestinian activist Hudhayfah Ahmad. And from West Jerusalem, director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, Jeff Halper. Thanks all so much for being with me. Let's begin with the history here. Because, Rami, you have indicated repeatedly before that, in essence, really, the creation of the state of Israel by Zionist and colonial powers was kind of the original sin that would need to be rectified in order to ever bring peace. So as we reflect on the Nakba, could that state have actually been created in some way without creating this catastrophe?
Yes, it certainly could have, but it didn't happen because this was the outcome of a colonial Zionist joint venture with the British and the Zionist movement, and then the Americans followed through with a lot of aid. But it didn't happen because the process, both for the British colonial powers and the Zionist movement, they wanted a Jewish state. They wanted the Palestinians out, and they wanted a Jewish state for various reasons. And this is what happened. But the problem is that that Jewish state has kept expanding and growing and getting into wars. Today, it's fighting with 5 or 6 people around the world. It's got the Americans active all over the Middle East militarily and trying to goad them into fighting Iran. So it's clear now that the Nakba was one moment in a century-long dynamic in which the Palestinians were first invisible people, and then they were victims, and then they were criminalized. Today, they're criminalized. To be a Palestinian is to do something bad in the West and in other places.
So
and this is...
Yeah, I mean, back then you believe the UK saw it, in their best interest to create a state, an ally in the Middle East. Is it still essentially in their interest today to have that state and to continue to defend it as it was built?
I don't think so. I think and Trump's behavior in the last couple of weeks suggests that there are places in the Western world where people are reconsidering exactly how to reconcile their ironclad support for a Jewish state with the fact that they don't want to be drawn into wars and create more turbulence and refugees and terrorism and wars all over the Middle East. So it's no, and the idea that Israel was a strategic asset was a bit of a fiction, like much of the stuff that Zionism has given to the Western world to support the creation of the state of Israel. But this is all unraveling now for the Zionist movement, and they're having to come to terms with the fact that almost everything they do now in Palestine or elsewhere in the West or wherever is under scrutiny, is publicized, is taken to court. They're being challenged in a way that never happened before. So we're hoping that this century of suffering for the Palestinians and dehumanization is possibly drawing to an end. And we have to keep repeating that the aim is to have a peaceful resolution that allows the Israelis to have their state and gives the Palestinians their state, with equal magnitude of rights on both sides and security. That's doable, but we don't have the leaders in place anywhere to get this done right now.
Okay. Hudhayfah, would you have more or less the same analysis, particularly as regards the history of the establishment of the state, the creation of the Nakba?
Somewhat, and I would add to it in the sense of, witnessing for the last 19 months Israel's relentless killing in Gaza, day after day, has given me and a lot of other people a deeper understanding of the pain and grief that the Nakba survivors and their descendants have carried for generations. On top of that, I'd add that it also underscores just how barbaric and outrageous it is when Israeli leaders, citizens, politicians repeatedly declare that it's time for another Nakba, while at the same time denying the first one that ever happened. They know exactly how barbaric it was, how bloody it was, and how absolutely outrageous it was. And witnessing it again just shows the true depravity of saying we want to do this again.
Yeah. Jeff, let me ask you, because you have shown, not just via your words, but you've actually, drawn up graphs and charts to illustrate how time and time again, since the Nakba, the land of Palestine is disappearing, especially, via settlements. So what would ever even be left at this point to, satisfy any requirement for peace? And actually beyond that, to really prevent kind of the formation and justification for armed resistance movements?
Well, I mean, you have to understand that this isn't a matter of creating a state, and we're in a conflict, and it can be resolved, and there can be two states. That is absolutely not the case. Zionism, and Israel's a product of it, is settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is unilateral. The Palestinians have nothing to do with it. It's all about us, Jews coming back and exclusively claiming this land as their own. And the Nakba and genocide is built into that. You can't come with the intention of taking over some other people's country, take their lands, displace them, replace them with your own settlers, with your own people, rename the country Israel, transform an Arab country into a Jewish country without a Nakba and without genocide. That simply cannot be done. And so the whole idea of negotiating with a settler colonial operation just doesn't work. What you have to do is decolonize it. And that means we have to say, look, whatever Israel has done, it's done. The settlements are not going to be pushed back. There is not going to be an Israel within the 1967 borders. There's not going to be any viable sovereign Palestinian state. We have to take what Israel has created, which is basically there is one state today, one apartheid state that's ruled completely by Israel. And we have to decolonize it, and we have to transform it into one democratic state of equal rights for everyone. So settlements stop being settlements, they're integrated, and the whole country has to be decolonized. Zionists and Jews have to lose their abilities to dominate and control the Palestinians, and we have to have a whole new civil state here of equal rights for everyone. And that's the only way you're going to dismantle the Zionist colonial regime.
Yeah. The problem is, Jeff, I mean, well, first of all, let me go here first, because as you talk about settler colonialism, you speak to so many Israelis, more like-minded to you, that will say these people, these extremist elements of Israeli society really are on the margins. They have managed, though, somehow to get disproportionate power in the current government. But once this government is gone, and as some will argue that, the United States is finally starting to see this government as an actual liability for the U.S. So once this government is gone, those settlers can be removed from the equation, those extremist elements in Israeli society, and a new peace process can be built. So, I mean, do you see that happening?
Not at all. The problem isn't the settlers. The settlers, we have to remember that this whole operation, this whole settler colonial operation of taking over Palestine and getting to where we are today was done by the Labor Party, the mainstream of Zionism. Ben-Gurion, Rabin, Barak, Peres, the suppression of the 1936 revolt by the British and the Zionists together, the Nakba, the taking of 90% of the lands of the Palestinians within what became Israel, the taking of 70% of the lands in the West Bank, the genocide in Gaza, the building of settlements, the ethnic cleansing that's going on today. This was all done basically by the Labor Party and by the Likud party that came after that. But the Likud just continued what was really a mainstream Zionist thrust of taking over Palestine. That intention and that structure and that process has kept on from the 1920s until today. It's the same thing. And if you replace Netanyahu and the Likud government, you're going to get the same government, the same policies. First of all, there is no more a Labor Party. So even a liberal Zionist movement doesn't exist anymore. You're going to get exactly the same policies. But even if there was a Labor Party in power, you know, in the Oslo process of 7 years, from 1993 to 2000, run by Rabin and Meretz, the left-wing Zionist party. Likud wasn't a part of it. The settlers weren't a part of it. 1993, there were 200,000 settlers in the West Bank. By the end of the Oslo peace process, run by the Labour Party, there were 400,000 settlers.
Okay.
So this is built into the settler colonial enterprise. It has nothing to do with what government's in power, if it's right or left. And the settlers are not the extremists. The settlers are simply the actors, the operators that are continuing. And we're getting close to the end because the normalization process that's being put into place by Trump is the end of settler colonialism. That's how it ends. It becomes normalized. Palestine becomes Israel. And we're getting very close to that point.
Okay, so it has to get, Rami, I guess, horrible before it gets better. But then will there be hope for this one-state solution, or is just the extremism, arguably on both sides, far too extreme and entrenched now that they would never effectively be able to live together in a post-apartheid state?
I think that's too simple a diagramming of the process. The Palestinians have given Israel everything it wants, including Hamas and the so-called extremists. The Arab countries have given Israel everything it wants. There are two main actors in this process. One is the mainstream Zionist movement, which Jeff rightly shows as both from the left wing, the center, and the right wing. The other evil actor is Western colonial powers. It used to be the British, now it's the Americans. Everything that Israel has done and the Zionist movement has done since the 1930s has been not only actively accepted, but actively supported by the British first and now the Americans. And there's no better symbol of this than when genocide Joe Biden traveled to the war room in Israel in October 2023, before the attack started in the genocide in Gaza. He was in the war room with the Israeli government, and they've given massive support and still give massive support. So we can't unravel or fix this situation until we do the decolonization, the de-Zionization of Israel, and the rolling back the colonial imperial instincts of the Western power. Remember something very important, as Ilan Pappé shows in his brilliant new book about the Zionist lobby on both sides of the Atlantic, which I recommend very strongly for people to read. The first idea of a Jewish state in Palestine did not come from Jewish Zionists in Russia or Europe. It came from Protestant British anti-Semitic ministers. And that's where the idea started, because the anti-Semites in England, like the US, didn't want Jews coming into the Western world from Russia and Eastern Europe. So they came up with this idea of let them all go to a Jewish state. So there's a clear component of complicity, active complicity, criminal complicity by Western powers. And that has to be addressed. It's a very complex situation, but South Africa was equally complex. It was fixed. It's not perfect, but it's the best model we have of how do you transform a colonial racist situation into one of more normal coexistence. It takes a long time.
I've heard that at time and time again, you know, the parallels with apartheid South Africa, but there just wasn't the level of outright armed conflict in the case of South Africa as there has been between Israelis and Palestinians. And that itself breeds a completely different level of historical resentment and hesitation to deal with the enemy in a more constructive way. I don't know. Hudhayfah, do you agree, or do you actually believe there is hope, as Jeff was, and Rami was agreeing, for a one-state solution going forward if the Zionist colonial mechanism is somehow deconstructed?
I mean, look, to begin with, I'm going to be very brief about this. There's no such thing as a two-state solution when the so-called sovereignty of one state depends on the erasure of the other. Its history, culture, and people from both memory and the face of the earth. And one thing no one's really been able to explain is why this two-state solution is still seen as a realistic option when that's not how colonial situations have historically ended. Not in South Africa, not in Rhodesia, not in Algeria.
Okay. But I mean, so then go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
You know, we also take South Africa as really an inspiration and kind of a model. I think it's the closest example of settler-colonialism to Zionism that exists, of course, with major differences. But the big difference with South Africa and why they succeeded was they had an end game. It was one person, one vote. Everyone knew why they were BDSing South Africa. Everyone knew what the end game was. Mandela was going to stay in prison until it was one person, one vote. We, and by we, I mean the Palestinians and the anti-colonial Israelis like me that support them, don't have an end game. You've got this collaborationist Palestinian Authority that's still talking two states because they're not going to survive if they don't. And the Palestinian civil society has not yet come together behind a political program. This has to be a civil society initiative. I'm part of a Palestinian-led group called the One Democratic State Campaign. We have a 10-point program. It's not the program, but it's the beginning of a discussion. Unless the Palestinians come together behind a political program, they're not in the game. You know, the whole Abraham Accords, Trump's whole normalization process doesn't even consider the Palestinians. They've never been consulted because they're not at the table. The states have their programs. Israel knows exactly where it's going. Unless there's a Palestinian leadership from the grassroots, and it has to be around a one-state idea, there is no other decolonization solution. We're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to convince states. We have to have a worldwide civil society movement for one democratic state.
Hudhayfah, do you see that leadership anywhere in the Palestinian landscape? And would you ever envision all Palestinians being able to unite around a singular style leadership for peace, for one state solution?
By design, that won't be allowed to happen. Any Palestinian leader who's been able to galvanize and rally people behind the vision that Jeff is talking about is either in prison or got killed. I mean, we're talking about various Fatah leaders who wanted to reconcile and negotiate and combine themselves with Hamas, and Israel stopped that. What would happen if Marwan Barghouti is released from prison and runs for elections? What would happen if the governments of Fatah and Hamas are allowed to negotiate and come together? Any time that effort has been tried by Palestinians, it has been utterly crushed by Israelis, because by design, they don't want that to happen. It's not the fact that it hasn't happened because Palestinians have been unable to unite. They've been more than willing to unite. It's just that every single time Israel has crushed it, and they've upheld puppet governments such as the PA.
Quickly, though, Rami, I mean, we've heard over and over again that if it weren't for the United States, the Israeli government would have to give, would have to change, would have to submit to peace talks, genuine peace talks. So now you even mentioned, you know, Trump, something maybe seems to be shifting, and that and even Thomas Friedman from the New York Times had said, you know, this Netanyahu government is not an ally of the United States. So is there a chance that the United States somehow, even inadvertently, might put Israel on the right track toward peace?
It's possible that the U.S. will take some gestures, but not significant enough to change the whole situation. The pressure for change is going to come, and this I disagree a little bit with Jeff, which is rare because everything he says is usually correct. I don't think civil society has any power. They've tried for 50 years. I've been involved in many activities, and they keep trying, and they have to keep trying. The power has to come when masses of people around the world in Europe, the US, the Middle East, everywhere, put pressure on the leaderships that this has to change. It's just what happened in South Africa, the boycott and other things, when the Israelis are so isolated economically and in other ways. And the US can play a big role in this. If it starts making gestures showing that Israel's current genocide is not acceptable, has to stop and then be rolled back. The issue is not peace, the issue is justice. When justice is achieved for both sides, then peace will follow. So I'm not hopeful in the short run, but I'm hopeful in the long run, because when you look around the world today, all over the global south, much of the Western world, Spain yesterday said they were not going to trade anymore with Israel. I mean, this is quite an extraordinary little gesture, but one of many. Every action that pro-Zionist groups take in the United States, including the government, is challenged in court. So for the first time in the 100 years of this conflict, there is an active opposition to Zionism and its Western colonial supporters by both people in the global south and the Palestinian community, but also in the Western world.
Okay, Rami, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.